Tonight, the man referred to as Donald Trump's fixer, Michael Cohen, about to change legal teams, leading to speculation he's close to cooperating with the feds to save his family. Plus, news tonight from the Washington Post. Robert Mueller still asking witnesses about Cohen as recently as 5 days ago, reportedly. And tonight, what it all means for the president, his West Wing, and his legal team as he returns from the summit as the 11th hour gets underway on a Wednesday night. Well, good evening once again from our NBC News headquarters here in New York. This was day 510 of the Trump administration. There is new pressure on the president's longtime personal attorney and so-called fixer, Michael Cohen of New York tonight, and by extension, on the president himself. Cohen is currently the subject of a criminal investigation into his business dealings. The case was referred, you may recall, to the feds in New York from the Mueller team in Washington. Sources close to Cohen tell NBC News he's now looking for a new legal team or lawyer to represent him. One report even raises the possibility that Cohen may be more likely to flip and start cooperating as a highly valuable witness for the government. NBC News reports that Cohen has not yet spoken with prosecutors, but the possibility of him flipping has rattled Trump's allies, who see the potential legal jeopardy for the president, in large part because, remember, the president knows the kinds of things that would be seized during a raid of Cohen's home and office. Also tonight, the Washington Post has brand new reporting on Robert Mueller's continued focus on Michael Cohen. Quote, Cohen is under intensifying scrutiny from Mueller, who is continuing to investigate episodes involving Cohen, according to a witness who testified in front of a grand jury in Washington last week. A former member of the Ukrainian parliament said in an interview that many of the questions he faced during several hours of testimony Friday were focused on his interactions with Cohen. The Post writes that the witness met with Cohen in January 2017 to discuss a back-channel peace initiative for Ukraine. Also reports that witnesses told the paper, quote, I realize that Michael Cohen is a target of special interest to Mueller. Rudy Giuliani, the de facto spokesman for Trump's legal team in the Russia matter, is speaking out about Cohen tonight. He first told NBC News' Kristen Welker, quote, I have no information suggesting Cohen is going to flip, and there's nothing involving the president, even if he did, and therefore I'm not concerned. Then here is what Giuliani said to Laura Ingraham on Fox News in just the past hour.
He's not cooperating, nor do we care, because the president did nothing wrong. We're very comfortable if he cooperates, that there's nothing he can cooperate about. Michael Cohen, I think, would tell you he's got nothing incriminating with the president. And really, they should stop going after him. They're torturing the guy. The reality is they're trying to frighten him.
Cohen worked for Donald Trump for a decade, guarding his boss's secrets, handling delicate matters in Trump's personal and professional life. Here is Cohen on the subject of his client prior to the inauguration.
I will do anything to protect Mr. Trump, the family. Fortunately, Mr. Trump has a significant number of people. I like to keep myself in that little circle of extremely loyal people.
He does.
And we will do what it's necessary to protect him and the office of the presidency.
That raid of Cohen's home and office a few months back yielded a large trove of documents, in addition to numerous cell phones and computers, which the feds are using to try to figure out if he broke the law during any of his business activities, including paying out things like hush money to porn star Stormy Daniels, who claimed to have an affair with Trump. While Cohen described his relationship with Trump as offering protection, here's how Trump described it.
Michael would represent me on some things. He represents me like with this crazy Stormy Daniels deal. He represented me, and, you know, from what I see, he did absolutely nothing wrong.
We also know that Cohen was paid by a company with ties to one of Russia's wealthiest oligarchs, Viktor Vekselberg, who reportedly met with Cohen both during the transition and at the inauguration. Throughout the 2016 campaign, Cohen worked on a then-secret project to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, and his name appears in the Steele Russia dossier as a link from Trump's inner circle to Kremlin agents. That's a lot, so let's bring in our leadoff panel on a Wednesday night in Washington. Shannon Pettypiece, White House correspondent for Bloomberg. Here in New York, Nelson Cunningham, former assistant U.S. attorney in the Southern District of New York, who worked under Rudy Giuliani and alongside James Comey, among others. He's also the former general counsel at the White House Office of Administration under President Clinton and happens to be the former general counsel for Senate Judiciary Committee. And Daniel Goldman is back with us as well, also former assistant U.S. attorney for the Southern District of New York. A lot of talk about the Southern District of New York around here these days. I wonder why. Hey, Shannon, bring us up to date on your latest reporting on Michael Cohen and the reporting out there today that what he's looking for in a lawyer is exactly what we have at the studio in New York, people with experience in the Southern District of New York.
Well, that could be what he's looking for right now. The indication we got was that he needed someone to help him through the next phase of this case. Now, whether that means he needs someone to help him through a phase where he's a cooperating witness, or a phase past document production, or a phase where he has to find a different way to pay for his legal bills, we were never really able to get to the bottom of so far today. But we do know, to this point that was made earlier, his legal bills were becoming astronomical. He had 15 lawyers, 2 data specialists, a team of paralegals and associates working around the clock, sleeping on couches, trying to review all these documents. Actually, one associate had to be sent home because he developed a hand tremor. So that is the type of legal might that we're talking about here. It's not the tens or hundreds of thousands. This could be something that reaches in well above $1 million. So the idea and this issue of him paying for his legal bills is a real concern. Whether that had anything to do with the switch in lawyers or not, it's an issue that's out there.
And one can only imagine the hourly rate while the meter is running that we're talking about here. Daniel, I'm going to read, I received questions from a nice man, a lawyer named Rob here in New York City, and you're the perfect man to answer this. Would you please consider asking your guests whether this might be a ploy to simply delay the case as new lawyers are afforded time to be identified and get up to speed? Second question, how many times can a client replace their attorney and for what reasons?
Well, the answer to the first is I don't think it's a ploy to delay the case because there is not yet a case. Let's remember what's going on right now is simply a review of documents that were seized pursuant to search warrants. He has not been charged with any crime yet, and so there is no case here. What I think is happening is that Michael Cohen is recognizing that he needs to get ready for the pre-indictment phase of this case, which means there will be negotiations with the U.S. Attorney's Office about what they're interested in, what charges they're thinking of bringing, whether he might cooperate. All of these things are things that the lawyers have, the prosecutors and the defense lawyers. And my guess is that Michael Cohen is readying himself to get past this document review, which did not reveal very many privileged documents to this point, and there's still a lot that remain to be searched. But he's starting to get ready for the big time, which is what actually happens with the case and whether he is charged.
Nelson, is there anything unusual thus far in all your experience as you listen to us recite the details of this case? Is it unusual he hasn't met with the feds? Anything unusual yet?
Well, first of all, we don't know for a fact whether he has met with the feds. Mueller's team, of course, has been very quiet. The Southern District of New York, which is handling the other part of the case, is also being very quiet here. We simply don't know. Every criminal case, 7/8 of it are underwater, like an iceberg. We only see the tip that's above the water. It is unusual at this moment that Cohen would be looking to change lawyers. Perhaps it's the money, as many of us suspect, but don't forget, until now, the Trump campaign was paying Cohen's legal bills. We learned from campaign finance documents released a couple of months ago that the Trump campaign paid $228,000 toward Michael Cohen's legal bills for October to January. And we'll learn in a couple of weeks when they put out their next campaign finance filings how much more they will have paid for Cohen's legal work. Maybe they're fed up with paying it. Maybe Trump has cut him off. That would lead to that could lead to the sort of break that we may be seeing today.
And there's this reporting from the Times just before we came on the air. The Trump family has been paying for the time-consuming and enormously expensive process of reviewing the voluminous materials seized in the raids, according to people familiar with the case. Recently, however, a dispute has erupted over the amount that Mr. Cohen's lawyers want to charge the Trump family enterprises for the review, that hourly rate again, which the lawyers have said they are running with a large team of associates, which Shannon mentioned. The disagreement could serve to further isolate Mr. Cohen from Mr. Trump, a risky move for the president. This is from a piece tonight in the New York Times. Now, Daniel, one more thing. Is it just coincidence that the decision to change counsel comes at the end of this kind of late-term discovery process where Cohen now realizes everything that was seized in the raid? His client, the president, has a pretty darn good idea of what was sitting in his lawyer's office this whole time, and now the feds know everything that was seized.
Well, and don't forget, the president and all of the Trump organization members also know what they did. Forget about what the documents were. But if Michael Cohen were to cooperate, he not only would be providing documents, but he'd be providing very valuable testimony. It could, look, there's a lot we don't know, and I wish I could tell you. I wish I could tell you, oh, it's X, Y, or Z. The fact of the matter is, I was surprised that he wouldn't have gotten a former Southern District of New York prosecutor to defend him once these searches occurred.
At that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I disagree with Daniel here on this.
Okay.
Maybe because I was a lawyer here in New York at the U.S. Attorney's Office, but I've also practiced down in Washington for the last 24 years in the Washington world. And for Washington, you need a different kind of lawyer than you need for a Southern District of New York criminal lawyer. You need a lawyer in Washington who is more media savvy, who understands the way congressional investigations work, who understands the 24/7 nature of the media cycle. His current lawyer, Steve Ryan, who I've known for 25 years, is one of the best that way. He's a practiced criminal lawyer. He worked on Capitol Hill. He's been through this before. I frankly think that a lawyer who knows the Southern District extremely well may not know the Washington media as well, won't know the Washington Post as well, and may not wind up defending him in the public sphere as well as the criminal sphere, as well as what he's got right now.
Brief rebuttal, Counselor.
Well, I was only going to say, I think up to this point, until the Southern District took over the investigation and he learned that after the searches, you were right, and that's why he had Steve Ryan. I think once things, from my experience in the past 10 years, when I was doing white-collar cases, almost every single defense counsel that I dealt with came from that office. And there's a reason for it. The different offices are particularized, as Nelson's saying. So I think we don't actually disagree that much, Nelson.
Okay. Well, to the always agreeable and Shannon, we just want to let you know we haven't forgotten about you, and now you get to take on the Mueller tranche of this. We have a report that Mueller is still asking Cohen-specific questions. And also, Shannon, we have whatever your reporting is on the status of the potential Mueller-Trump sit-down.
Yes, this issue of an interview is about to come to a head. Our reporting indicates that Mueller's office wants to wrap this up. This question about whether or not the president's going to sit for an interview, the president's lawyers, Rudy Giuliani, has indicated he wants to wrap this question up too. They've been putting it to the back burner because the president was focused on this Singapore trip. But with wheels down this morning from Singapore, the next big issue on this president's plate is going to be whether or not he sits for an interview with Mueller. And the indications we get from current and former Justice Department officials and from the president's lawyers is that we could be on a collision course to a subpoena and a Supreme Court battle. There is a very good chance that Mueller will issue a subpoena if the president does not voluntarily sit for an interview. The president's lawyers have indicated they do not think he should have to comply with a subpoena, and so then it goes to the courts. It will go to the D.C. court and likely make its way all the way to the Supreme Court. So this could be a very big battle that could go on over months potentially and be another cloud hanging over this presidency. in addition to this investigation, this question about whether or not the president will even sit down for an interview with Mueller.
And I noted that Rudy Giuliani slipped in a mention of a possible subpoena with Laura Ingraham, who herself is a very good lawyer. Nelson, you were nodding yes.
Well, I wondered about this question of a presidential subpoena, and so last month I sat down and took a look at the legal precedent. I wrote a piece in Politico that appeared last month.
We saw that.
And the Supreme Court cases are actually leave very little doubt that the president must comply with the criminal subpoena. In U.S. versus Nixon, back the Watergate era precedent, the Supreme Court unanimously said that Richard Nixon had to provide documents in response to his criminal subpoena from a grand jury in Washington, D.C. He had no ability to avoid that. 20 years ago, the Supreme Court, again unanimously, said that Bill Clinton had to appear and testify and give civil testimony in a sexual harassment case, the Paula Jones versus Clinton case. Now, if you put those two cases together, one case that says a president must give civil testimony and another that says that a president must reply to a criminal subpoena for documents, I find little doubt that the Supreme Court looking at this would swiftly conclude that any judge looking at this would swiftly conclude that the president must testify if handed a subpoena.
Daniel, last word. If you were a betting lawyer, should Paul Manafort, as the feds like to say, bring a toothbrush to court for his Friday appearance, do you think his bail will be revoked?
Yes.
Wow. Thank you very much for a conclusive and one-word response from a member of the bar here in New York. History has been made. Our thanks to Shannon Pettypiece for starting us off with her reporting tonight, to our co-counsel, Nelson Cunningham and Daniel Goldman. Thank you all very much for starting us off in great fashion. Coming up as we approach our first break, how is this affecting the president and his West Wing? 3 top reporters share their latest insights. And later, the campaign tour billed as a road trip that also happened to have an air wing attached. The 11th hour just getting started on a Wednesday night beneath the Washington Monument. Welcome back. As we've reported, President Trump's longtime attorney Michael Cohen is expected to part ways with his current lawyers and hire a new lawyer or legal team to handle the ongoing federal investigation into his business dealings. NBC News reports that Cohen hasn't yet spoken to federal prosecutors involved in the inquiry, nor is that unusual, despite some of the speculation you heard from one of our co-counsel in our first segment. But some say today's news is a sign that Cohen may indeed cooperate in the future. Meanwhile, the White House is closely watching how Cohen's situation plays out. Maggie Haberman of the New York Times reports, quote, one person with knowledge of the legal staffing change said that Mr. Trump's camp was very displeased with the way the Cohen investigation had so far been conducted. Mr. Trump himself has told people he is angry at Mr. Cohen over the messiness of the situation, especially those aspects involving Ms. Clifford, a.k.a. Stormy Daniels. But the president has also indicated to allies that he is worried that if he pushes Mr. Cohen away too hard, it could increase the likelihood that Mr. Cohen will offer information to the government. This, as a new report from Emily Jane Fox of Vanity Fair reveals, Cohen feels hurt by the lack of support he has received from the Trump family. And we quote, earlier this year, he heard that Eric Trump was telling associates that he felt Cohen was sloppy in the way he handled the Daniels agreement, which rankled Cohen. I feel like Don Quixote, he said to people close to him. It's ruining my children's lives. It's ruining my wife's life. It's worse than a pit in your stomach. Interesting place to start our discussion, and here with us to do that, John Heilman, MSNBC national affairs analyst, also happens to be co-author of Game Change and Double Down, as well as co-host of The Circus on Showtime in his spare time. Jonathan Lemire, White House reporter for the Associated Press, and Ashley Parker, Pulitzer Prize-winning White House reporter for The Washington Post. Ashley, you're a stylist among stylists here. I'd like to begin with you. Michael Cohen had a vision of life far different from the life he is having in New York right now. Living in a hotel because a pipe in his Trump apartment building burst. Everyone now knows where to stake him out and wait to try to see him as he gets into any number of cabs and lifts and Ubers to go about his business. This is a guy who thought he might be White House counsel. What are you hearing on the other end from people in the West Wing about the plight, the life, and potentially the future of Mr. Cohen?
So, on the one hand, people inside the White House are not particularly sympathetic to him. There's a reason that his life has turned out very differently than he envisioned it, and sort of almost since the campaign, it's been a series of disappointments. He expected a huge role on the campaign. He didn't have that. He was sort of shunted off to an office in Trump Tower, but not really officially part of the campaign. As you mentioned, he expected to come to Washington with the president, be White House counsel, and he was blocked. He was blocked by some of the president's family and a number of people who knew him quite well from the campaign. And now this, and there's a reason he was blocked, because people on the campaign knew, and people in the president's orbit knew, that when there was a sensitive issue or a sensitive discussion that they didn't even like talking about, someone would come in and say, "That's okay, Michael Cohen will handle it." That said, there is a lot of unease within this White House about him, and there's a sense as the Mueller probe unfurls that basically people believe in the president's orbit that he will not be guilty of collusion or conspiracy, but it's sort of these other tangential things that worry them. The obstruction of justice and, of course, exactly what's going on with Michael Cohen. And the most frustrating thing for a lot of these people, especially the low-level, mid-level, and even some senior White House aides and Trump friends, is they don't know what they don't know, and they're learning it the way we are, in the news, reading a report that says, you know, this new legal shakeup for Cohen's legal team might mean he'll flip. So they don't exactly know, but they just have a sense it's not looking good. That's
a harrowing existence. Jonathan Lemire, you know the harrowing and exquisite telephonic sleigh ride thrill of a phone call with Rudy Giuliani. You engage in those periodically. Based on your latest, what is his thinking, does it seem to be, about Mr. Cohen? Also, while we're at it, the possibility of this Mueller interview.
I think it's two things. Giuliani, in my last conversation with him, akin to what he said tonight in those video clips you played, sort of is projecting confidence. The idea that we don't believe that Cohen will start cooperating with the federal prosecutor. Even if he does, we're not worried about it because the president has not done anything wrong. Behind the scenes, people close to the president, some senior aides in the White House, as well as his extended orbit of influential figures in Trump world, are very nervous about this. They feel that the idea that Cohen, who has worked for Trump for so long, who knows so much, who knows where those bodies are buried, could end up cooperating is something that concerns them deeply. As Ashley just said, there's also this fear of the unknown. Since those raids in his office and hotel room, they're not sure what was seized. They're not sure what could be in there, what could be incriminating. They feel like, and they also realize that there could be potentially, whether it be with payments to the Stormy Daniels situation or other sort of business dealings, those are things where the president could be very vulnerable as this investigation ramps up. As far as the Mueller interview goes, let's remember, Giuliani publicly said a few weeks ago that they would start having conversations about whether or not they would have that interview once the North Korea summit was over. Well, as of 24 hours or so ago, that summit is over. Giuliani and the rest of the legal team are supposed to convene shortly to have more discussions as to whether they want to have this interview. But every signal they're sending lately has been making it harder and harder for Mueller's team to clear the bar that would make them want Trump to sit down. At the moment, I think it would have to be considered unlikely.
John Howman, veteran journalist and political psychology enthusiast. I note the president went after us, NBC and CNN particularly today, and gave us that rare enemy of the people stamp of approval. What is his mindset returning from what he saw as a spectacularly successful summit with Kim Jong-un, coming back to what he knows exists? And remember, I keep reminding everyone, he knows what was in his lawyer's office.
Yes, well, and I will point out the one thing I like most about that tweet is that we were all supposed to be distracting from the, quote, deal with North Korea. I don't know what that deal was, given that nothing was given by North Korea to the United States of any tangible significance or merit, so there wasn't really a deal. In any case, look, the president, I think, has part of the reason, if you wanted me to play psychologist, I'm happy to. Sure. You've invited me to, so I will. Part of the reason the president, I think, put so much emphasis on this North Korean summit was because it is a play for the history books, that big trophy you put up on the mantle. But another part of it was, like we all know, when we are facing dread, when we are facing the fight, the moment of truth, the cataclysm, we often find a great round of golf that we want to go play, or that great weekend in Cabo, whatever it is that we can look forward to before we have to come back to the ugly business at hand. This has always been the moment where we know, because of the way the federal guidelines work, we know the Mueller investigation and the Southern District investigation are going to kind of come to a halt around Labor Day for a period of time.
Yeah.
No, around Labor Day for about 2 months before the election. They may resume after the election, but we have a window here where some business is going to get done. And the president knows that's true. And he knows it's going to be an ugly time. Final decisions are going to have to get made on him, whether he's going to sit with Bob Mueller or not. And this situation with Michael Cohen, I believe, Donald Trump knows what was in his lawyer's office. He also particularly knows, because the reality is, and this is part of this Emily Jane Fox reporting, for this whole time, Michael Cohen's lawyers and Donald Trump's lawyers are working together. They are sharing information. The president's lawyers and the president know exactly what is there in real time, not just on a basis of memory, but they know exactly what's there right now as the documents are being and the audio is being gone through, and determinations are being made about what's privileged and what's not. And they're learning that very little is privileged and an awful lot is not. And we know not just where bodies are buried, but the kind of work Michael Cohen did for Donald Trump for that decade, all around the world, in the ugliest parts of the world, doing some of the ugliest business deals imaginable, or trying to. It is, the president is starting to, he's been acting out for 16, 17 months. But right now you can feel a sense, I think he knows the moment is nigh. And I think he's coming back and realizing that he might get through it, but it's going to be a very ugly summer.
It does have a Scorsesean whiff about all of it. We are so happy to have these three with us. We are less thrilled to have to roll a break, but we must do that to keep this studio operating. All three have agreed to stay with us. We'll be right back after this. Republican Congressman Mark Sanford, who was upset last night in his primary, says his past criticisms of President Trump led to his loss. The former South Carolina governor told the Washington Post this morning that a last-minute tweet from the president endorsing his opponent, and by last minute we mean something like 4 hours before the polls closed, is exactly why more members of the GOP don't speak out against Trump. Quote, "They don't want the tweet that I got last night. There's no motivation like self-motivation." Today, 2 GOP senators who have already chosen not to seek re-election warned again, as they can, about the dangers of blindly following the president. This morning, Tennessee Senator Bob Corker rebuked members of his party for just that.
It's becoming a cultish thing, isn't it? It's not a good place for any party to end up with a cult-like situation as it relates to a president that happens to be purportedly of the same party.
Arizona Senator Jeff Flake took to the Senate floor this afternoon to urge his colleagues to fulfill their role as a check on the executive branch.
We continue to act here as if all is normal, as if all parties are observing norms, even as the executive branch shatters them, robustly trafficking in conspiracy theories and attacking all institutions that don't pay the president obeisance. Our justice system, the free press, the list is getting longer. We demean ourselves and our proper constitutional role when we act like we work for the president, that we are only here to do his bidding, especially now.
John Heilman, Jonathan Lemire, Ashley Parker remain with us. And John, I'm going to posit a theory to have you kick it around.
Yeah.
That this may be the most normal thing Donald Trump does as president, that under FDR, under LBJ and Richard Nixon, you had to stay in line and you were called out if you weren't. They didn't use quite the levers of power that he uses to do it, but this is a president thing.
Yes, although I would say, 100%, we've seen presidents of both parties try to enforce loyalty in various ways and exact some kind of political cost. Usually, it would not be a president on whose future in the office depends on his party maintaining control of the House, making it his political situation less tenable. Exacting retribution, usually you would pick a place where the cost to yourself would be less severe potentially. That's one thing. The other thing is that, you know, you look at a guy like Mark Sanford, usually the kind of deviations would be the deviations of loyalty or deviations of ideology. You'd see someone who's supposed to be a member of the party voting with the other party, for instance, and you would inflict a cost on them for that. Mark Sanford is a conservative. Like he's voted with Donald Trump 87% of the time.
I was going to say.
So this is a exacting retribution purely because of some personal pique, purely because Mark Sanford has said Donald Trump should release his taxes, as opposed to killing him on a tough vote, siding with Nancy Pelosi on some important matter of policy. Those are the places where it's different. Exacting, trying to enforce discipline, normal. Trying to enforce discipline when it's self-destructive and when it's over no matter of genuine policy or political principle, that's abnormal.
Jonathan Lemire, reaching out on Twitter 4 hours before poll close is an airstrike. It is tactical and kind of stealthy. Can we expect more of that? Is this going to be the midterm election by airstrike?
It could be. I think the president was very pleased with that result. Whether or not he thinks that the tweet itself helped propel Sanford to a defeat, or they already got wind that Sanford was going to lose, and therefore he wanted to pile on, to sort of send that message, like, don't cross with me. A message, by the way, that was reemphasized tonight by the head of the Republican Party, Ronna McDaniel, who tweeted, "Complacency is our enemy. Anyone that does not embrace the real Donald Trump's agenda of making America great again will be making a mistake." That is a significant broadside to people in her own party, the party that if they challenge this president, if they challenge the incumbent here, they would be deserving of a target last night, like President delivered literally an airstrike from Air Force One as he was coming back from his overseas trip.
You ever think you hear a member of Mitt Romney's family saying that?
I know. Well, this is Mitt Romney himself.
Not something I anticipated.
Hey, Ashley Parker, is everyone around Donald Trump ready to embrace, including him, this new look GOP? Like it or not, that's what it is.
Well, the president's aides in the West Wing are certainly, in the political shop, are kind of happy with this cult of personality. It works out well for them. And what is so striking to me is sort of the way in which policy and ideology in the Republican Party has just fallen by the wayside. To cite one example, the president, you know, he has sort of been going it alone, taking a lot of unilateral actions. You'll recall at the end of Barack Obama's second term, when he did that, when he had his pen and his phone, and he made a lot of moves with his executive authority, some most notably on immigration, all of the Republicans called him King Obama and an emperor. And that's a very fair view to have in theory, depending on your views of executive power. But what is interesting is when the president is exercising the exact same executive authority, and even more so, take the pardons, for instance, saying he can even pardon himself, you have almost no Republicans standing up to him. And the one who did, recently Senator Corker, trying to introduce legislation to kind of curb some of his unilateral trade actions, was shot down by members of his own party who were silent, and even by the Senate Majority Leader, who basically said that the Corker legislation was an exercise in futility. So yes, if you're Trump's political team, this is great news for you.
Three journalists whose work we pay attention to: John Heilman, Jonathan Lemire, Ashley Parker. Our thanks for tonight. And coming up, why Hillary Clinton's emails will emerge tomorrow as a news story all over again. We'll have that when we come back. New topic. We are just hours away from the release of a highly anticipated report from the Inspector General at the Department of Justice. And it's a widely understood axiom in Washington that if you're working for the Department of Justice, you generally don't want the Inspector General looking into your business, because it's their job to try to come away with something. For a year and a half, this particular Inspector General, this gentleman here, has been reviewing the FBI's handling of the Clinton email investigation leading up to the 2016 election. Among other things, the IG is looking into former FBI Director James Comey's motivations, including but not limited to why he felt the need to hold a press conference days before a presidential election. President Trump is expected to be briefed on the IG report ahead of its public release. Washington Post telling it this way: Trump is widely expected to use the Inspector General findings to launch fresh political attacks against not only Clinton, but also the law enforcement officials behind Robert S. Mueller's Russia probe, which Trump has repeatedly referred to as a witch hunt. Now, the president has expressed his eagerness to see what's in the report. He said this last week, and this may give away what he's looking for. Quote, "What is taking so long with the Inspector General's report on crooked Hillary and slippery James Comey? Numerous delays. Hope report is not being changed and made weaker. There are so many horrible things to tell. The public has the right to know. Transparency." With me from Washington to talk about it, Julia Ainsley, our NBC News national security and justice reporter. And Julia, the nation turns its lonely eyes to you. Give us a viewer's guide of what you know we should try to expect tomorrow.
Well, I think what you can expect is a preview that the president just gave us through that tweet. There's going to be a lot of political football through this. Democrats might look at this and say, look, this really did, the actions of James Comey really affected Hillary Clinton's chances in the 2016 election. And then the president is going to be looking at this, trying to find evidence that there is a deep state, that the FBI and the Justice Department are out to get him, and that they have political bias. That is one of the reasons why Hillary Clinton was never charged for how she handled those emails. And it seems he's already setting it up so that he can actually attack this report. And the Inspector General himself, Michael Horowitz, who's really maintained a reputation as a shrewd investigator, regardless of who he's investigating, Trump wants to go ahead and set it up so that he can attack Horowitz if he doesn't agree with what's in this report. But I can tell you at NBC News, we have a big team that will be ready to go on this. We expect it to go out to the public in the afternoon, and we will be going through every page of this report. It's going to be long. They've worked on this for a year and a half, and it's known that it should be pretty hard on James Comey, especially focusing in on those decisions that you laid out, Brian, to go public with his decision to not refer Hillary Clinton for charges in July of 2016, but then to reopen that investigation in October and then close it again just days before the election. They'll be looking into those decisions and whether or not he may have been in violation of something like the Hatch Act that prohibits government employees, particularly those in federal law enforcement, from making any kind of statement, putting their thumbs on the scale in an election like this.
I always ask you about what stage we're at in the Mueller investigation. Do you have any reaction or reporting having to do with the Washington Post reporting that Mueller was asking Cohen-related questions in the past 5 calendar days?
You know, I don't have fresh reporting on that, but I think that what we can take away from that, Brian, is that Cohen and Mueller are not separate. And we've been saying this for a long time on your show, although there was part of this probe that Mueller kind of spun off and handed over to Southern District of New York and said, please take a look at this. Those were the people responsible for those raids on Cohen's apartment and hotel and offices. He always had a hand in this. Mueller's been in the driver's seat on this, and so it makes sense that he's asking those questions, particularly as it might pertain to any kind of pay-to-play. If Cohen was responsible for giving access, particularly by foreign governments, to the president, they will want to know who accessed the president, what they paid, and whether or not there was any undue influence along the way. That is part of Mueller's job, and it can come from not just Russia, but other countries that might have tried to influence this election or what happened after the election.
On the eve of what's going to be another big day on your beat, Julia Ainsley, we sure appreciate you staying up and talking to us tonight. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.
And coming up for us, trouble for a big-name Dem in the Show Me state because there was more to her recent road trip than she showed her constituents. That's when we continue.